There is a certain kind of fame that doesn't just make a person known, but turns them into something larger than themselves. Over time, the real individual begins to fade, and what remains is an image, a symbol that people recognize instantly but rarely question. The life of Marilyn Monroe is one of the clearest examples of how that transformation happens and how difficult it is to survive it. She entered the world under a different name, Norma Jean Mortensen, in Los Angeles in 1926. Nothing about her early life suggested that she would become one of the most recognizable figures of the 20th century. In fact, if anything, her childhood pointed in the opposite direction. It was unstable, uncertain, and shaped by circumstances she had no control over. Her father was absent, and her mother struggled with serious psychological issues that made it impossible to provide a consistent home. As a result, she spent much of her early life moving between foster families and temporary guardians. These were not dramatic, cinematic hardships, but something quieter and, in many ways, more lasting. It was the kind of upbringing where nothing feels permanent, where you learn not to rely too heavily on any one place or person because it might disappear without warning. That kind of environment changes how a person sees the world. Stability becomes something distant, almost abstract. Security feels conditional, and over time, you begin to understand that being accepted by others is not just a social advantage, but a form of protection. By the time she reached her teenage years, this understanding had already shaped many of her decisions. At 16, she married James Doherty. It wasn't driven by romance in the way people might expect. It was practical, almost necessary. Without that marriage, she faced the possibility of returning to institutional care, and this was a way to avoid that outcome. For a brief period, her life became more predictable. She worked during the war years, lived within a routine, and experienced something closer to stability than she had known before. But that stability came with limitations, and over time, it became clear that it was not enough. The shift that changed everything did not arrive with any sense of importance. It came quietly, through a chance encounter with a photographer who noticed her while she was working. Moments like this happen often and usually lead nowhere, but in her case, it opened a path that had not existed before. She began modeling, and almost immediately, there was a response. The camera reacted to her in a way that went beyond simple appearance. There was a quality in her presence, a sense that she was both aware of being seen and able to create a connection through that awareness. It gave her images a kind of immediacy that drew attention. That attention led to opportunities in film. At first, the roles were small and uncertain, the kind that could easily have been the beginning and the end of a short-lived attempt at acting. Hollywood was filled with people trying to do exactly the same thing, and most of them disappeared without leaving any lasting impression. What made her different was not just her ability to attract attention, but how easily she could be shaped into something the industry understood how to sell. This was the point where Norma Jean began to recede and Marilyn Monroe began to take form. The transformation was deliberate. Her appearance was altered to fit a specific ideal. Her hair lightened to a shade that would become instantly recognizable. Her voice was refined, softened into something that matched the image being built. Even her mannerisms were adjusted over time, shaped into a consistent presence that audiences could identify immediately. Hollywood was not simply offering her roles, it was constructing a persona. At first, that persona worked in her favor. She began to receive more attention, more roles, more visibility. Audiences responded quickly and strongly. There was something about her that stood out, something that drew focus even when she was not the central figure in a scene. The industry recognized that reaction and began to reinforce it. But reinforcement comes with limitations. The more successful the image became, the more narrowly it defined what she was expected to be. She was cast in roles that emphasized charm, attractiveness, and a kind of lightness that left little room for complexity. It was an image that was easy to understand and easy to market, and because of that, it was repeated again and again. What is often overlooked is that she was aware of this process while it was happening. She understood that the image being built around her was both an opportunity and a constraint. It gave her access to success, but it also set boundaries on how that success could evolve. She did not accept those boundaries easily. As her career developed, she began to look for ways to expand beyond the role she was being given. She took her work seriously, studying acting in a way that many people did not expect from her. She wanted to be seen as more than an image, more than a presence that could be placed into a scene to create a certain effect. This desire led her to New York, where she studied at the Actors Studio, immersing herself in a different approach to performance, one that focused on emotional depth and psychological realism. It was a clear attempt to reshape how she was perceived, both by the industry and by the audience. At the same time, her personal life became increasingly visible. Her marriage to Joe DiMaggio reflected one kind of possibility, a connection to stability and a more traditional life. Her later marriage to Arthur Miller reflected another, a desire to be understood intellectually and taken seriously beyond her public image. Neither of these relationships provided what she was looking for. Fame has a way of complicating even the most straightforward aspects of life. It introduces pressure, expectation, and constant attention, all of which make it difficult to maintain something genuine. Over time, the difference between the person and the public image becomes harder to manage. By the late 1950s, this tension had become more pronounced. She was still successful, still widely recognized, but the process of maintaining that success was becoming more difficult. Film productions were affected by delays, her reliability was questioned, and the industry that had once shaped her image began to respond with frustration when she no longer fit easily into its expectations. There were also deeper struggles that were less visible but equally important. She dealt with ongoing anxiety, difficulty sleeping, and an increasing reliance on medication, something that was not uncommon in Hollywood but rarely discussed openly. The demands of maintaining a public image while managing private difficulties created a strain that was difficult to sustain. What makes this period significant is that there is no single moment where everything changes. Instead, it is a gradual accumulation of pressure, a series of challenges that begin to overlap and reinforce each other. Professional expectations, personal struggles, and the weight of public attention all converged in a way that made it increasingly difficult to find balance. Even as she remained one of the most recognizable figures in the world, there was a growing sense that control was slipping away. The image that had once been carefully constructed and maintained was no longer something she could fully manage. By 1962, her situation had become deeply uncertain. There were projects that had begun but not been completed, relationships that remained unresolved, and a sense that the structure that had supported her career was no longer stable. Her death that year, at the age of 36, was officially ruled as a probable suicide, though it has been surrounded by speculation ever since. The details have been examined repeatedly, and different interpretations continue to circulate, but none of them fully capture the complexity of what led to that moment. What remains, more than anything, is the contrast between the image and the reality. She became one of the most enduring symbols of her time, a figure associated with beauty, fame, and a kind of effortless presence that continues to be recognized decades later. At the same time, the person behind that image lived a life shaped by instability, ambition, and a constant effort to be understood on her own terms. That contrast is what makes her story difficult to resolve, because when people think of Marilyn Monroe, they are often thinking of something that was carefully created, refined, and presented to the world. The real person existed within that construction, influencing it, shaping it, but never fully escaping it. And in the end, that may be the most important part of her story. Not just how she became famous, or how her life ended, but how difficult it was to remain a person inside something that was never meant to be human.